My name is Margaret Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, and I used to teach English at a local high school before I retired. These days, I spend more time with my hands in the soil than around books, but I still carry a certain rhythm in how I speak. I live in Seabrook, South Carolina, in a beach house that my husband Robert and I built the year after our son was born. We had just enough saved to make it happen. More than anything, we wanted to be near the water. That house didn't just shelter us, it shaped us. Robert was a quiet man. His hands knew how to make things feel safe. He sketched the layout of the house on a napkin one night after dinner. By the following spring, we had walls. The porch was his favorite part. He called it the thinking room. I planted hydrangeas in front of it and rosemary along the walkway. I told him that even if we grew old and forgot our names, the rosemary would remember us. After he passed, the house became something else entirely. It didn't echo even when it was silent. It held me. I'd wake up early around 6:30 a.m., fix a cup of Earl Grey, and sit on the porch wrapped in a blanket. The sea air had a way of pressing gently against my skin. It never wanted to startle me. On most mornings, I didn't speak at all. I just watched the light change. Some days it felt like Robert was still out there. Maybe he was hammering in the tool shed, or calling me inside because the kettle had started to sing. The garden was small but well kept. I grew tomatoes, basil, and lavender. I liked the rhythm of tending it. After Robert died, I found that routine was better than comfort. Routine didn't ask questions. It didn't expect me to be cheerful. It just showed up every morning and waited for me. Our son Andrew would visit from time to time. He always brought something: coffee beans from a place in Charleston, or a book he thought I'd like. He'd sit on the porch and say things like, "You should write about this house, Mom. People should know what you built." I'd smile and say, "Maybe someday." Then I'd change the subject. Things started to feel different after Andrew married Sophie. She was lovely in the way people are when they know how to be liked. Polished, organized, always offering to help. At first, I appreciated her gestures. She made a lemon cake the first time they came to visit as a couple. It was thoughtful light, just sweet enough. I remember thinking she reminded me of someone who had always been a guest in someone else's home, not the host. On one visit, she asked if I'd ever thought about replacing the old wicker chairs on the porch. She said they squeaked too much when you rocked. I smiled and told her that was the sound of real life. The next month, she sent me a catalog. A few patio sets were circled in pink ink. At first, it was just small things. Suggestions about updating the kitchen. Comments about how much work the garden must be for someone my age. Questions about where I'd want to be in 10 years. Each remark came with a polite smile, but the message underneath was clear. They were imagining a future without me at the center of it. A future that didn't include me on this porch, or at that table, or walking barefoot across the cool pine floors. I didn't say much. I nodded, thanked her for her thoughts, and I kept my hands in the soil. I've always believed that people reveal themselves in how they look at you, especially when they think you're standing in the way of something they want. I still made tea every morning. I still walked down to the edge of the sand and stood there with my arms folded, breathing in what was mine. But I had started folding myself smaller, just a little. The kind of small that makes you easier to walk around. It started with soup. Sophie showed up one Thursday around 4:30 p.m. with a white ceramic bowl wrapped in a tea towel and a smile too wide for the weather. She said she had made chicken and wild rice from scratch. She said I looked pale and should take the weekend to rest. I thanked her, of course. That's what you do when someone brings you soup. The next day, she returned with chamomile tea bags and a list of spa treatments from a resort 3 towns over. She circled the lavender wrap and the facial treatment in blue ink. said she'd booked them for me, said I deserved to be pampered. I didn't ask who paid, and she didn't offer the information. On Saturday morning, I woke with a mild fever. Nothing serious. Just the kind of thing that settles into your joints and makes you feel old in places you usually forget you are. Sophie arrived shortly after breakfast, full of apologies and honeyed instructions. She told me to put my feet up. She would handle the mail. There were some property papers, she said. Minor things. Tax adjustments. All she needed was my signature. I remember the pen more than the pages. It was silver and cold in my hand. She flipped to the right places, placing a sticky note beside each signature line. Her nails were trimmed and pale pink. I asked if Andrew had read through everything. She smiled and said yes, of course. He'd approved everything. I signed the papers. 2 weeks later, I got a phone call at 9:15 a.m. It was Andrew. His voice was tight, like he was reading from a script he didn't believe in. He said the house had sold quickly. The market was strong. He mentioned a couple from Atlanta. They'd fallen in love with the garden and offered cash. Then, as if to soften the blow, he said they'd found me a place nearby with a private garden view. It even had a sunroom. I didn't speak. Not right away. I looked out the window at the hydrangeas blooming in defiance. I asked him when the decision had been made. He said it was final. The papers had all been signed. That night I sat at the kitchen table with the last cup of tea I'd ever make in that house. I looked at the marks on the wood from years of family dinners. I thought of Robert's hands sanding those very edges. I reached for my notebook and tried to write, but the words fell apart as soon as they touched the page. The move was scheduled for the following Tuesday. They sent a van. 2 men in blue shirts packed my belongings like I was a guest checking out of a hotel. Sophie handed me a folded list of what she'd already unpacked for me at the new place. She said it would be easier that way. The care facility was clean. Too clean. The garden was small and square, bordered by trimmed hedges and flower beds that looked like they came from a catalog. There was no sea breeze, no porch, no creaky wicker chair, just a window with a view of still air. The first night I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed holding a photo of Robert. It was the one from our 15th anniversary taken just outside the beach house. He had paint on his jeans and sun on his face. I whispered a thank you. Not because I felt grateful, just because I didn't know what else to say. There were no angry words, no arguments, just decisions made in rooms I was no longer invited into. They said I needed rest, that I shouldn't worry about paperwork or finances anymore. They called it kindness. They called it care. But none of them asked me what I wanted. I unpacked my clothes slowly. Each item folded more tightly than I remembered. I found my garden gloves wedged between 2 sweaters. I stared at them for a long time. The soil beneath my nails was still faintly visible, as if the earth refused to forget me. Dinner was served at 5:30 p.m. They brought it on a tray. A woman named Louise asked if I'd like to join the others in the dining room. I told her maybe tomorrow. She smiled. The kind of smile people give to someone they assume won't fight back. That night I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to the silence. It wasn't the same kind of silence the beach house had. This one felt hollow, not peaceful. I kept thinking about that stack of papers, about how easy it was to vanish on a page. A signature, a date, a quiet assumption. I used to think that being steady was enough, that if I showed up loved deeply and never complained, I'd always have a place. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being seen. I stopped being asked. I became something they managed. And the part that stung the most wasn't the sale. It was realizing they didn't think I'd mind. I started with the file cabinet Robert built from scratch. It was old oak, slightly bowed from humidity, and held everything from birth certificates to mortgage agreements. I sat on the floor of the guest room, slowly flipping through folders until I found the one labeled Deed. It smelled faintly of cedar and dust. The papers were yellowed at the edges but still crisp. My name was there next to Robert's in ink that had not faded. I took the documents and walked 3 blocks to the law office where Robert had done his estate planning. It was now run by his former associate, a woman named Ellen Price. She looked surprised to see me but invited me in with the same gentle voice I remembered from years ago. I explained what had happened, then handed her the file. She read silently, flipping pages, her expression growing more focused. When she looked up, she said, "The deed transfer." Sophie pushed me to sign, had never been filed with the county. The signatures were there, but without final notarization or processing, they were meaningless. Legally, I still owned 20% of the property. My stomach did not leap. My hands did not shake. I just nodded and asked what we could do next. By 3:15 p.m. that same day, Ellen had filed a motion to pause the sale pending review. It was quiet, discreet, and completely above board. No drama. No need to call Andrew or Sophie. The hold was granted. A week later, I learned the final closing meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. No one told me, but I still had friends who worked at the courthouse. I picked my clothes carefully that day. Gray slacks, a clean blouse, my wedding ring. I left my new place early and arrived 10 minutes before the appointment started. The office was a modern space with glass walls and brushed metal signs. The conference room was down a hallway lined with abstract art. I walked in as they were laying out the final documents. Sophie looked up first. Her mouth formed the beginning of my name, but nothing followed. Andrew stood up slowly, unsure whether to greet me or brace himself. I said I was there to observe. The agent at the head of the table glanced at my file and paused. My name was still listed on the title. I watched as her eyes moved from the paperwork to me, then to Andrew. She asked if I intended to approve the sale today. I said no. Calm. Clear. I added that I was not comfortable signing away the final piece of my husband's legacy. Sophie opened her mouth to speak, but I held up one hand. Not with force, just a quiet stop. I explained that I had filed a notice of intent to transfer my share into a charitable trust. The home as it stood could not be sold without my consent. That consent would not come. Instead, my share would fund a small scholarship in Robert's name for young students from Seabrook who wanted to study architecture. The room fell still. Andrew looked stunned. Sophie looked furious beneath the surface, but masked it with a tight-lipped smile. No one said a word for several seconds. Then the agent gathered the papers and excused herself. I folded my copy of the original deed and placed it back in my bag. I turned to Andrew and said I hoped he would one day understand. That legacy is not something you sell off like patio furniture. It is something you carry. I did not wait for his reply. Outside, the air was cooler than I expected. I walked past the benches and flower beds without hurrying. My legs were steady, my breath even. I felt no victory, only gravity. That house had been stripped from me with politeness and planning. But I had not disappeared. I had simply stepped aside long enough for the truth to catch up. I didn't go back to the facility right away. I took a detour past the beach road. Parked near the same old public lot Robert and I used when the driveway was full. I sat there for 10 minutes watching the seagulls tug at bits of seaweed. Then I reached for the gloves in my purse and smiled. There was still time to plant something new. The porch still creaked when I stepped onto it, just like it used to. After the legal dust had settled, and the scholarship fund was set in motion, the beach house was mine again. I didn't throw a party or make an announcement. I simply came back. I cleaned out the corners, repainted the shutters, pulled weeds until the skin on my hands grew rough again. Then I replanted the wisteria. It took to the soil quickly, like it remembered the shape of the roots that had once lived there. I trimmed the hedges and brought back the old rocking chairs. They still groaned with every movement, but I found the sound comforting, like something that had been waiting for me. The sea air still felt the same against my face. Mornings began the same way they always had. At 6:30 a.m., I brewed tea and watched the light shift across the floorboards. I didn't need everything to be exactly as it was. I only needed it to feel true again. One afternoon, as I deadheaded the lavender, I heard the gate swing open. It was Harper, my granddaughter. She had her backpack slung over one shoulder and a small envelope in her hand. She didn't say much, just hugged me and sat beside me on the porch steps. Then she passed me the letter. It was written in Sophie's handwriting, slanted, careful. She said she hadn't understood what it meant to grow older and feel unseen. Her own mother had disappeared from her life years ago, not because of distance, but because of pride. Sophie wrote that in her fear of becoming invisible, she had tried to control everything around her. She saw now that in doing so, she had become what she once feared. She ended by saying she wasn't asking for forgiveness, only understanding. I folded the letter and looked at Harper. Her eyes were soft, the same green as Robert's. I told her to let her mother know the garden was blooming again, and that the gate was never locked. We sat in silence a little while longer. Then she stood and waved goodbye. I watched her walk down the sandy path, her hair catching the sunlight in strands of gold. That evening, I sat near the window with a blanket around my shoulders. The ocean was quiet but alive. The house didn't feel like a possession anymore. It felt like a part of me. Not because I had fought for it, but because I had chosen to return. Sometimes restoration doesn't come in a grand gesture. Sometimes it comes in the planting of something small, in a voice finally heard, in a silence that no longer feels empty. And in the end, the house remembered me. So I remembered myself.